Hey, what's up? It's Phoenix and welcome back to my YouTube channel. I'm very excited because today I'm going to talk about my favorite books of the year 2020. Not necessarily books that came out in 2020, but certainly my favorite reads of 2020. So without further ado, let's dive right in. So before I talk about my top 5 books, or the first half of my top 10, I wanted to describe my favorite book, my all-time favorite, The Talisman by Stephen King and Peter Straub. This book has influenced me for an incredibly long time since I was a teenager, reading Stephen King novels as well as other books. And this book I read again this year because I had more time because of the quarantine. And I have to admit that this is still my favorite book that I have ever read. So it may not be on my top 10 necessarily, but it is a book that I had to highlight as my favorite book of all time. And I'm very glad that I was able to read it again in the year 2020. Now, my 10th book that is on my top 10 would be Journal of the Plague Year by Daniel Defoe, who also wrote Robinson Crusoe. I like this book for a variety of reasons. This year, when we were dealing with the pandemic, I was feeling extremely nervous about what was going on, and I wanted to have a deeper understanding of what was going on. And so I definitely decided that I was going to check out books that document and talk about plagues that we've had in the past. This book was written in about the 1700s, early 1700s, and this plague definitely wreaked havoc on the world, and it definitely seemed like an appropriate book to read whenever I am in the midst of a pandemic. One of the most powerful themes that came out of this book is the idea that plagues do ebb and flow, just as disasters and hard times ebb and flow. And one of the most important ideas that I got out of this book was certainly the idea that things that are negative and tragedies do happen, but we do find a way to get through, and life continues on. And I definitely found that to be a very inspiring notion. It is something that I definitely don't want to forget, which is that I will, hopefully at least, continue to live, and I will continue to adapt to the world and to the conditions that we find ourselves within. And I really am glad that I was able to read this book. Certainly, this book had very good writing. I really liked the prose. I just found it to be very beautiful. And I don't always pay attention to the prose when I'm reading, especially if it's fiction or nonfiction, but I certainly found this book to be very beautifully written. So definitely I encourage you to check it out. The 9th book on my top 10 is Cosmos by Carl Sagan. I very much like scientists when they describe the world through the lens of science, and I think Carl Sagan is a good example of this tradition of science writing. It is a very interesting book, which I picked up because I was curious about space and the universe, and I have been working at the Clark Planetarium, which has allowed me to see space and to see awesome exhibits that deal with space in a variety of ways, such as exhibits with meteorites or simulations of what it is like to be in space and various things. And so I picked this book up in an attempt to understand the world of science and astronomy much better. One of the most remarkable themes that comes out of this book is certainly the idea that space and the universe and science is something that definitely helps us develop our understanding of the world, but how there is certainly a deep mystery to all of these things. And so this book, Cosmos, certainly identifies the process of science, specifically of astronomy, but also through the discoveries of philosophy and other sciences, and we are able to come to a deeper understanding of the world, which is a very powerful theme. I really liked this book because of the way that it laid out a lot of the various processes in the universe, and how since the time of Galileo and even before, we have certainly asked with zeal what the universe is and how we can understand it. And Carl Sagan definitely knew a lot about science and a lot of the various things that happen in the universe. And I found this book to be very remarkable for that reason. I'm very moved by the idea that we can continue to explore the universe by using science, and that we can continue to explore the wonderful and amazing and mysterious universe in which we inhabit, and I definitely find a lot of wonder in that. So yeah, I would definitely encourage you to read this book, especially if you're interested in science. The next book on the list is Carl Jung's book, The Red Book, which I was very glad that I was able to read. Carl Jung is described as a psychologist or psychoanalyst, and he was in the tradition of Freud. And as you may or may not know, Carl Jung broke with Freud at a certain point in his career. Freud was mentoring Carl Jung, but Carl Jung decided that he wanted to take his explorations and discoveries into a different realm, which often includes spirituality. It included spirituality and religion, as well as his ideas that he developed of the archetypes and the collective unconscious and a variety of different concepts that he is famous for. I had been thinking about Carl Jung because of Jordan Peterson's being influenced by Carl Jung, and so I wanted to give this book a try because it is one of Carl Jung's best books to date. So the reason why Carl Jung is an interesting thinker, especially in the realm of psychology, is because of the way in which he taps into the way that people think. And one of the interesting things about this book, The Red Book, is that he does deal a lot with a lot of his themes that he's developed and his ideas that he's developed through his writing, but he does this in a very spiritual way. And it's very interesting to think about how the Red Book is literally Carl Jung's exploration, not just into his own mind, but through his own mind is an exploration into the mind of everyone else. And I definitely find a lot of value in that. And so I find that to be very exciting. Carl Jung is exploring his own mind to be able to understand the depth and complexity of the world that we live in, and he often uses a lot of biblical characters and ideas and beliefs to be able to paint a bigger picture of what it is like to live in the world and to have consciousness, to have a psychology, to have a psyche. And in that way, I find this book to be very remarkable. So I definitely encourage you to check it out. I also very much love the poetry of Louise Gluck. I have read a couple of the books of poetry in her collected works, and I very much find her poetry to be very refreshing. I have been influenced a lot by experimental poetry. That was a lot of what I studied in school, but I've always enjoyed different types of poetry and the different ways in which we can write poetry. And Louise Gluck is very interesting to me and very intriguing because of her approach. She is not really experimental at all, and she often focuses on very direct communication with the poetic language that she uses. And I find that to be very remarkable that that is what she uses. I find it very remarkable that she has a very, I would describe, clean and direct style, which I think very much captures a lot of the depth of of the subject matter that she conveys, while also simply doing beautiful things and elegant things with words and language itself. I was interested in Louise Gluck because she is artistic in a lot of ways, and I would describe her books as definitely being art, even if I'm used to a different tradition of poetry, although I don't want to limit myself on that because I do like different types of poetry. However, with my experimental bent, it might be a little bit easier for me to judge poetry that is a little bit more straightforward and focuses less on the language. But nonetheless, I was actually very moved by the poetry that I've read so far in this book because of how beautiful it is, the things that she captures. It is very remarkable, and I definitely encourage you to check out her poetry. Now, my top 6 book, as you could call it, is Hamlet by William Shakespeare. I definitely enjoyed reading Hamlet. I very much love language, and I wanted to read Shakespeare for the language that he conveys and that he uses with his writing and with his plays. I have been thinking a lot this year about blank verse and the form of the sonnet, and because of my interest in some of these forms, I wanted to revisit Shakespeare. Hamlet is a remarkable book. I very much have enjoyed reading it, and I very much enjoy Shakespeare because of what he does with the art of language and what he does with the art of ideas and dramaturgy, and I find that to be very remarkable and very, very interesting. Hamlet is a great play, and it is often people's favorite play by Shakespeare. I'm not sure that it's my favorite play by Shakespeare, but it is definitely one of my favorites. And I think that it is very remarkable that a lot of quotes that I have heard in day-to-day life actually come from this play. There were so many moments where I was like, I've heard that before, and I've heard people say this exact quote. And so that is very interesting to think about Shakespeare's ubiquitous influence. It is definitely a remarkable thing. One of my favorite aspects about this play is the writing itself and some of the formal qualities that Shakespeare is utilizing. And I also really like the story itself. I think the characters are very larger than life, and they capture a lot of wonderful aspects. This play captures a lot of wonderful aspects of human nature and humans as a collective species and people who live in the world. And I could very much imagine these characters. I think that the writing in this play is very vivid. So I definitely encourage you to check it out. So those were the first 5 books that I liked, 10 to 6. And next we will be doing, in part 2, my top 5 favorite books. But I definitely hope that you will check out some of these books that I've recommended, and I will definitely see you whenever I am describing the next 5 books that were my favorite. So yeah, I'm Phoenix, thank you for watching, and I will see you next time.